The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
So we have 2 drums here. This is one that I made out of Colonie boo, and in the Abenaki language, caribou is a word that was loaned from the Eastern Algonquin languages, which Abenaki is a member of. And Colonie boo means the shoveler. So when we're saying caribou, and it's almost the holiday season, of course, or it is, we talk about the reindeer. They're a member of the caribou family. And that word caribou means the shoveler.
The shoveler.
Because to get the lichen under the snow, the reindeer or the caribou have to dig with their askanak, with their antlers, to move the snow aside. And so this was noticed by native people, and they were named the shovelers.
The shovelers.
Colonie Bruchac.
People call me shovelers, but it's got a whole different connotation when they use it.
Well, in this case, I actually made this drum. Went to one of many different language gatherings where we teach the language and we try and have different things to bring us together. And in this case, we came together around making drums. We talked in the language about drums and the vocabulary of drum making, and we all left with a drum. And mine is made of a Colonie boo madagin, the skin of a caribou. And I would like to use it along with my dad's, who's got a nulka, I believe.
Yes, it's actually a deerskin drum made by our friend who made our asaklons. By who's that would be?
Bill Laurent.
Bill Laurent,
Yep.
a wonderful Mohawk artist and storyteller who usually comes to our Saratoga Native American Festival at SPAC every year, end of September. So,
this is a traditional welcoming greeting song, been sung throughout the area we'd call Indakina, which is the name of our center, but it was originally the name which meant our homeland. And that goes all the way from the east coast of Maine and all the way right to this area where we are now, the Hudson River, the Mahiganituk, literally the Tomahawk River, the home of the Mohican people who are a member of the Eastern Algonquin. This would be that whole area we'd call Indakina, and this song just welcomes people into that land, and it's a good way to begin. Yogano de yogano da, yogano de yogano da, gayawani he hayuki yo he, 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 hayu. Yogano de yogano da, yogano de yogano da, gayawani he hayuki yo he, 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 yogano de yogano.
Oh, thank you.
And if you don't mind, I'd use a little bit of the Abenaki language in the story to kind of bring us back. Like that song, which is very, very old, the story is also pretty ancient, and it talks about a time when winters were so hard, maybe not like they are nowadays. Winters, they say, were much harder long ago here in the Northeast. And so hard that sometimes people's spirits would be broken by the winter, by its cold winds and its length and its strength and the amount of work that would go into keeping a fire going and having enough food. And so people were sometimes transformed by winter into creatures, monsters. We'd call tsinoak, sometimes kiwak, basically forest wanderers who would then kind of succumb to the cold and wander through the forest looking for victims, which would be the warm souls of other living human beings. And they could take those souls from people and bring them into their chest. And inside the chest of the oldest Sinu, sometimes referred to as a Wendigo, if we head further west, which people are a little more familiar with the idea, also existed here in the Northeast as the Sinu. It would grow stronger, sometimes growing as large as a tree. It grew larger and larger. And they were very powerful too. They took on the power of all those spirits or souls that they took in them. And they say, as I begin the story, I'll do it as I said, al nombaiwi, or in the Indian way, noat non goniwi, alomiwi indakinak, pazago pahanem, losa oma alomiwi pakwamiak. Long ago, there was a woman living in our land, and she had gone ice fishing, kwani pok, during the winter. Agama abi nidali ta inkuwatsui upiton namas. She was hoping she might, catch some fish. Kanwa agama sanombam losanadi alit spiwi kadagik al nombak. Her husband had gone with the other men to hunt. Agama naguitsiwi. She was totally alone there as she fished. Agama kina alomiwi nabi ta inami hun kaguyon sagi nongwat. She looked into the water and she saw something strange. She saw a reflection of a face. Kanwa anda agama litagwaon, but it wasn't her face. Yo litagwaon quilbiwi agama. This face was behind her, looking down over her. Agama u namito nisno wildial spiwi kazak. 2 hands with long nails reaching down towards her. She knew from that reflection in the water that that was not the face of a human being. It had been a human being long ago, but it had been changed into kiwak, or tsinu, to one of these horrible creatures, and it was hungry. She knew this because she could see even in the reflection that its lips had been gnawed away as it searched for food. And she didn't know what to do. For a moment she just sat there looking at the reflection, frozen, afraid. She knew from stories she'd listened to many times that if she were to try and run, a tsinu could just howl. And if it were to howl and you heard its voice, you would be frozen in your tracks and it could come and take your soul. And she didn't want that to happen. She knew she couldn't fight the tsinu. No one had ever been able to hurt a tsinu. Spears would bounce off it, arrows would break. So she had an idea. Uli mikawi dahonzi. She had a new thought, a new way of thinking. Ibita agama ska ta quilbosa ta kina ni tsinu ta agama ida kwai mahom. She just stood up and turned around, held her arms open, and said, "Hello, grandfather." Well, that tsinu had been greeted in lots of ways. It had been greeted with screams and running and people throwing rocks and sticks and spears at it, but no one had ever called it grandfather. And the tsinu was Odami Dahon Zongan, confused. She reached out and said, "Grandfather, it's been so long since I've seen you. Where have you been? Come to my home. Come with me." And she reached out for the hand of that tsinu, something no one had ever done to that tsinu. And that tsinu was even more Odami Dahon Zongan, even more confused. It just reached its hand out. And that woman took one of its fingers and started to walk, gesturing for that tsinu to follow her. And that tsinu, so confused, just followed behind her as she walked back to her wigwam. Well, just as she got to her wigwam, her husband had returned from hunting and saw there his wife leading, holding the hand of a great big tsinu. He raised up his bow with an arrow pulled back, realizing all he'd do is bring that tsinu to him and probably give his life to save her, but he had to do whatever he could. Luckily, she turned and saw him there and called, "Husband, husband, do you not remember? Don't you recognize my grandfather? Come greet him. Ida quiet ziagama. Come say hello to him." And he thought, "Oh no, I didn't realize I'd married a woman with a tsinu for a grandfather." And knowing she was up to something, he realized he should listen to his wife. And so he lowered his bow and arrow and walked over and said, Kwai ma home, hello, grandfather. Again, he'd been greeted as a grandfather, something that had never happened. Invite him into our home. She said, oh, of course. Pidiga, we guomek, enter our house, he said. And so he crawled into that home. It was far too hot. She said, oh, take the bark off the back of the lodge. Don't you see our grandfather? He's uncomfortable. To be good hosts. And so he did that. He took the birch bark off the back of the lodge behind the tsinu so the cool air could blow in. He brought that bark into the lodge and placed it between the tsinu and the fire that burned. Over the top of that fire there was a pot of stew, always cooking. They say that it was always important to have food cooking in case an unexpected guest would show up at your house. This was the tradition of the Abenaki long ago and still is in many, many households. She reached into that pot and filled a bowl with that soup, handed it around the bark. The other side, that tsinu just sat there very, very confused, being offered food, greeted as a grandfather, invited into a home. The tsinu didn't know what to do. It was so confused that for some reason it just reached out and took that hot bowl of soup and drank it. Well, when that hot soup went into its frozen body, it burned, and that tsinu screamed out a terrible howl. That woman and her husband saw from the other side of that bark shooting up through the smoke hole steam coming from the inside of that tsinu. And in the steam, they could see faces. She knew what was happening. She took that bowl from the tsinu and filled it again, handed it around the bark, and that tsinu drank and screamed again, tamina, tamina, again and again, each time screaming. Each time they saw faces. Some they recognized, some they hadn't seen for a long time. Those spirits being released from within that tsinu. Well, when she scooped the last drops of soup from that bowl over the fire, the sun was just rising in the east. She handed it around that bark, and a little old hand reached out. I'm cold, they heard, and they looked on the other side, and there sitting was not a tsinu, but a little old man. Her husband took the bark and put it back on the lodge and warmed the lodge and gave a skin to that old man, who they lived with for the rest of his life as if he truly was their grandfather. And that's the end of that story.
Yeah, a long time ago, they say, and I'd go, ho.
Hey?
That makes sure our audience is still awake. All you out there, ho? Hey!
Hey!
Good, I heard that person over there, someone asleep in that chair. But
That wasn't snoring, that was a hey. That was a hey.
Well, long ago, Gluskomba did many great things to help the people, and he traveled around with a friend of his who was called Sagunk, or Skunk. And one day, the snow began to fall and did not stop falling. The people called out for help, for Gluskomba to come and help them. So Gluskomba made the long and difficult trip to this village of people where the snow kept falling, and Sagunk came with him. And when he got there, he said, I think I know what has happened. It is that the snowbird has opened its wings and has not closed them. So I'll go visit the snowbird. So Gluskomba began to walk towards that high mountain on which the snowbird sat, and little Sagunk followed behind him, jumping from one footprint to the next. It was not easy for him to do this. He was getting very wet and very cold, but he was very determined and followed Gluskomba to that mountaintop, where Gluskomba found the wind eagle standing with the snow pouring out from beneath its wide open wings. And Gluskomba said, you remember what I did to the wind eagle? I bound its wings. I can bind your wings too unless you close them and make the snow stop. And the snowbird said, oh, I understand, and closed its wings and the snow stopped. And then they turned and went back down the mountain. By the time they returned to the village, the snow had melted away. The people were rejoicing. They thanked Gluskomba. They gave him food. They totally ignored Sagunk. Totally ignored him. Now, on the way back to that village, they had passed another hill. A great bird stood on top of that mountain as well, with its wings wide open and light pouring from it. And Sagunk had said, what is that? And Gluskomba said, oh, that is the day eagle. With its wings open, light spreads over the world. Well, Sagunk was so upset that when the night came, he decided he would do something to make sure that people remembered him too, just as they remembered Gluskomba. So he crept up to that hilltop where the day eagle slept with its wings closed, and he took a tight cord and wrapped it around that day eagle and tied his wings, and then crept back and went to sleep. Well, the next morning, when the sun was supposed to rise, when the day was supposed to come, no day came. The people were afraid. What's happened? What's going on? Well, Glus Combat had an idea. He found his way to that mountaintop. He discovered the day eagle had been bound, and he managed to untie one wing, but not the other. It was so tightly tied. So to this day, there's always light just on one half of the world and not on the other, because the day eagle has to turn around on that mountaintop. And Glus Combat found up there the tracks of the person who had done that, the tracks of Segunk. He followed them back to where Segunk was pretending to sleep. He said, I know what you did. It was not a good thing. Now, in those days, Segunk had pure white fur. And Glus Combat took his pipe and dumped it out on top of Segunk, turning him black. Then he said, so you'll remember what you used to look like. I will do this. And he took his fingers and ran them down Segunk's back to make a long white stripe. And now Segunk was not only a different color, he was also very smelly from those ashes that were dumped all over him. Well, Segunk was so unhappy, he went into the nearest field and began to rub himself off on the grasses, trying to spread his scent on those grasses. But Glus Combat followed behind him and just blew his breath on those grasses, and those grasses became sweet. They became sweet grass. And to this day, Segunk has that bad smell, that black coat with a white straw on the back. And to this day, the sweet grass grows, its scent as sweet as the breath of Glus Combat. That I wrote many years ago, which has had various titles. One is just Meetings. It's a short poem. It goes like this. Strange how the face of a woman in whom you might have seen no beauty short years ago becomes transformed because her eyes or the curve of her throat remind you of someone. Perhaps this is the way to grow old, more in love with this world for each person we've known.
Today I'd like to tell a folk tale. Usually I tell personal tales, but once in a while I like a good humdinger of a folk tale, and I think you'll like this one. Rosalind Curvin has a wonderful version of this in a book called English Fairy Tales and Legends. Here's my version. Off the northeast coast of England, there is a huge rock that sits in the ocean. And on that rock, there is a castle. And long ago, and once upon a time, a king lived in that castle. His wife had died years before. He had a daughter, the Princess Margaret, but she was growing up, and he wanted to marry again. So he went off to find a new wife. And would you believe? He was back in a week with a brand new wife. Everyone was rather shocked. Granted, she was beautiful, and she was witty, and he was obviously smitten. But within a month, everyone else in the kingdom couldn't stand the sight of her, because she was also spiteful and selfish and cruel. She was especially cruel to the Princess Margaret. The entire Cinderella bit. Gone were her pretty clothes, gone were all her privileges. Well, the king and the queen decided to have a fancy ball. Everyone who was anyone was invited. And as each person arrived, they went to the king, they went to the queen, they swore their undying allegiance. They said to the king how beautiful the new queen was. She smiled. One person came that no one knew. His name was Young Knight of the Wind. And he went to the king. He swore his allegiance. And then he ignored the beautiful queen, walked across the room to find sitting in the corner the Princess Margaret, and he said, "I have come from afar to see you. And it is true what they say. You are the most beautiful woman in all the world." The queen was not pleased. She said to the guards, "Seize that young man, tie him, gag him, throw him in a rowboat without oars, and set him adrift in the rocky ocean, where we hope he will be smashed to death on the rocks." The guards obeyed her immediately, and everyone at the party went home. It broke the party. And that night, when everyone was asleep, the queen went downstairs to a secret room she knew about, where she kept all her books of magic charms and spells and herbs and potions and poisons. Because you've got to know, she was not just the queen. She was a wicked witch. And the only reason the king was so much in love with her was because she slipped a love potion into his drink every night. Well, that next morning when the princess woke up, she felt terrible. She felt strange. Her shoulders were pushing up against the ceiling of the room, and her head was pushed down. And as she started to move, she broke through the walls of her bedroom, and her long tail, for by now she had a long tail, was swishing behind her, leaving a trail of stinking slime. She got down the stairs, breathing out smoke and flames. When she got to the door of the castle, the king turned to his wife, that magic love potion completely broken, and said, "What have you done to my daughter?" And the queen said, "Fool, can't you see? I've changed her into a dragon." Well, meanwhile, the knight, who had been set adrift, somehow managed to avoid all those rocks around the castle and drifted all the way to Norway, where he was rescued and served the king and collected a little store of gold. But he never forgot the princess. And everyone who came from that castle of Bamberg, he asked, "Have you heard any news?" Finally, a traveler came who was from the village, and he said, I've come from there. He said, "I hope I never go back." He said, "There's a dreadful dragon, lives there now. All the land around has been scorched, and the dragon has eaten every sheep and cow and every bit of poultry that lives. People are starving." And the knight said, "Well, the king has many brave knights. Why doesn't he do something about the dragon?" And the traveler said, "Oh, the king can't forget that that dragon used to be his daughter." Well, the young knight wasted no time. He took some of his gold. He went to visit a wise woman in the village. He asked what he could do about the dragon and about the witch. He knew he wasn't strong enough on his own. And the old woman says, "There are things you can do. First of all, you must build your boat out of the wood of the rowan tree, because only the wood of the rowan tree is strong enough to protect you from witchcraft. And next, when you see the dragon, you will be afraid, because the dragon is a fearsome thing. But you must remember who the dragon used to be. And finally, don't forget about the witch." Well, the young knight built a boat out of the rowan tree, and he sailed back, and as he got close, the witch caused great storms in the ocean around the castle. But his boat stayed strong, and he landed safely on shore. When he got on shore, he looked around. Everywhere he looked, the land was scorched black, and he didn't see a soul on shore. He stepped on the sand, and overhead he heard a fearful, loud, whirring sound, the sound of massive dragon wings above his head. And he smelled the stinking stench of dragon. And then the dragon landed right in front of him, puffing smoke and bits of flame. And he was dreadfully afraid. And he feared for his life, and he thought to himself, "If I'm going to die, let me die fighting for my life." And he pulled out his sword. And then he remembered what the wise woman had told him. And he closed his eyes for just a second, and the image of the beautiful princess came into his head. And he put his sword down on the ground, and the dragon did not move. He stepped towards the dragon. He put out his palm, and he stepped closer and closer to those oozing, stinking scales of the dragon's hide. And when he was close enough, he kissed the dragon's skin once, twice, 3 times. And with that, there was a giant poof, and the sand blew up. He couldn't see the dragon anymore. And when the sand settled back on the ground, there in front of him was the beautiful princess. Oh, they embraced. Everybody came running out of the castle. Everybody was joyful and laughing. The king gave the princess hand in marriage right away, and the princess and the knight were very, very happy until the queen came out of the castle, and she was furious. She raised her scepter in the air, ready to cast another venomous spell. And the knight remembered the third piece of advice. Don't forget about the queen. He ran as fast as he could and grabbed the scepter out of her hand and flung it into the ocean, where it sputtered and sank, twisting slowly down into the water. And at the same time, the queen began spinning round and round, sputtering and sputtering, until people looked down. There was nothing left of her but a small, stinking toad, which hopped into a nearby muddy ditch and was never seen again. But the princess and the knight and the king and everyone else lived happily ever after.
Goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round